Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we are in for a treat today. But before we get into this interview with Stuart Isett, I want to say thank you to all the people who made comments about my last film, which was in regard to Elena Dorfman and my podcast with her. I mentioned in that film that these audio podcasts might become much more of a part of my life. They have been for a long time. For those of you who don't know, I have a tab on my website, shifter.media. I have a tab called Dispatches where I've been doing these audio interviews for quite some time. But what you don't know is that over the past couple of weeks, I've had several different organizations outside the Blurb ecosystem reach out to me and ask me about doing these, both video and audio podcasts, as part of their network and programming. My goal is to combine all these together, my Blurb ecosystem with these outside ecosystems, and make one channel that does everything. That's what I'm working on now, in addition to my daily duties. But that long-form interview with Elena, for me, is a goldmine. One of you actually wrote a comment and said that felt like about 3 years of art school in 1 hour-long interview. And I think that's a very appropriate take on what that was, and I think that's also an appropriate take on the interview we're going to discuss today. There's not a lot of information like this floating around in the photography world in particular. If you reduce that to the online photography world, it is even more rare. And I think a lot of that is because many of the people operating in the online photography space don't have any connection to the actual industry. So they wouldn't necessarily know someone like this and be able to sit with them and have the trust to be able to have a discussion about your personal life and your professional life. A lot of people are going to be guarded about that. You've got to do it in the right way, and you've got to know what to ask and what not to ask. So again, thank you for doing that. This is going to be, you're going to see a lot more of these in the near future. Today's interview is with photographer Stuart Isett. I met Stuart in 1999 at the Visa pour l'Image Photojournalism Festival in the south of France. If you don't know about this event, it has been the world's premier photojournalism event for several decades. It probably still is. I don't go anymore because I don't work as a photographer any longer. But when I did, I was typically there every year. Agencies, editors, magazines, and the best exhibitions of photojournalism that were happening anywhere in the world. So it was a really wonderful event. I met Stuart in '99. We stayed friends. At that point, he had transitioned out of living in Bangkok, a decade of covering Southeast Asia, and had moved on to Tokyo, and then on to Paris, and then on to, of all places, Seattle, where oddly enough, people, believe it or not, this is going to be this just in, it's raining here in Seattle. And so I am, of course, traveling through Seattle in the van, and I reached out to Stuart, who was nice enough to say, yes, I will sit in front of you and do this interview. And what he shared to me is, again, a masterclass of how a real working photographer comes to be. And let me just say this, when you hear this interview, you're going to understand. Yes, we joke a little bit about equipment from time to time here, but it has nothing to do with what he has become in his life. This is about education. It's about commitment, professionalism, being more than someone who can press a button. That's what my hope is on this interview, is to share a little insight onto that. And again, thank you to Stuart for actually taking time to do this. I appreciate it. The actual SoundCloud file that I'm going to link out to is over an hour long. So again, I'm going to share a little 10-minute excerpt here, and then I'll be back. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Dispatches. It's been a while since we've done one of these, but they are going to come hot and heavy from here on out. And we are very fortunate today to be in Seattle, Washington with photographer Stuart Isett, who is someone I met in 1999 at the Visa pour l'Image Photojournalism Festival in southern France, which at the time, and still is to some degree, I'm sure, was sort of the signature industry photojournalism event around the world, and it was an absolute blast. And my wife and I have been in the van traveling across the West Coast as of late, and we stopped in Seattle to see Stuart and his wife. And I have to say, the last 48 hours of hanging out with him has been crazy. It's been educational, and it's been a reminder of how much photography is a part of his life in a way that I think is incredibly beneficial for a lot of people to hear. Because Stuart is someone who is, in my book, a straight up legit photographer, and that translates in a variety of different ways, which I want to touch on now. But how are you doing there, sir?
Good. Thanks for coming up to Seattle. Sorry about the rain.
That's okay. And he just made us coffee and toast, so we're sitting pretty.
A good British breakfast.
Yes. And well, it's funny you mentioned the British thing because I always joke that Robert Pledge, who's the director of Contact Press, has an accent that's impossible to identify and peg. He's the international man of mystery, and you yourself have a bit of that accent. So let's talk a little bit about that accent, a little bit about the family, because you've got some English in the history, you've got some Wyoming in the history, and a variety of other places. But let's talk accent, family, and education, and your photo education in particular.
Well, the accent comes thicker when I'm being interviewed. So if I said if my regular friends will think, why does he sound so British? So American family moved to Europe, birthed me in Switzerland, and then we moved to London. And I had American parents who grew up there, and they sent us to all English boys' school. It's something you see in a movie with boys' caps and uniforms and everything and the ties, and 3 American boys in the schooling system being tortured by the Brits. And then finished and came back to the States, went to university here, went to Michigan. Then I left, moved to Asia because I decided I want to be an Asia specialist.
Well, wait. We got to back up here.
The accent kind of comes and goes.
Yeah.
It comes when I'm being interviewed or been stopped by the police.
Okay. That's good. Smart.
Generally, the 2 situations it works best. So
you went from English boarding school. Now I hear that.
Not boarding school. It was boarding school. I wasn't a boarder, but yeah.
Okay. And I hear that, and I think of the classic books of literature that I've read that detail that life, and I'm like, wow, that seems way too serious for me as a Texas public school survivor. Mm-hmm. But you came back and you ended up at University of Michigan. But what was your undergrad study?
Undergraduate was actually Asian Studies and History.
And why on earth study that?
I was interested in history. I grew up in Europe, and I wasn't going to study European history. And actually, my brother, who's a China specialist and teaches at a university in the Midwest, suggested one class. It was Vietnamese history class, and I got wrapped up in Southeast Asian history, particularly Cambodia. Not so much Vietnam, although that was my initial class, but Cambodia and Thailand and Laos. And I studied Thai language for 2 years at Michigan, and yeah, it was kind of hard to explain. And that was back when you would say I was studying Thai, and people would go Taiwan. They couldn't. They American, 1980. This is 1985, 86 when I made that. Started doing that. There were no Thai restaurants. It was, people didn't know about. It just wasn't on people's map. 40 years ago, 35 years ago, this stuff just. Now people are out there Instagramming, but it wasn't like that when I was in 1986. They couldn't put it on a map. So you
see everything you skipped over by jumping all the way to Asia right away. So, there's all this good stuff.
Oh,
now,
in between.
I think to me that's a very telling thing. First of all, go to Asian studies. You have a brother who's a China specialist. I think all of these things that we're mentioning, the reason they're important is the context of what they eventually led you to in your life.
Yep.
And so you go to University of Michigan. And you're studying Thai, and you're an Asian studies and history major. But then you went back and you went to grad school at Columbia.
Well, there was a period in between. So I finished, and it involves motorcycles.
Okay, good. That's why we're here.
And any story that gets derailed involves a motorcycle for some reason. So I graduated from Michigan, and I went to Bangkok, and I was in a intensive Thai language program at Chulalongkorn University there, and I was teaching English. And I was like, I'm going to be an academic.
Okay, that phase.
And my brother was on that track, and it just kind of made sense to me, and I was fascinated with this shit. And then I got a motorcycle. Yeah, and said, I'm going to ride around Thai. My Thai skills were good enough at that point that I could get around and go travel around Thailand. I had a camera with me. I had an FM2. Still have the same camera. And off I went with a motorcycle and a camera, no helmet. I look at the pictures, I'm like, oh, that's insane. And what I did, I would never do that now. But I rode around the countryside with a camera and came back to Bangkok, and then I came back to the U.S. because my program ran up. I was there a little over a year, and I was like, I don't want to be an academic.
Yeah, there's life out there.
There's life out there, And I have full respect for academia, but it just wasn't for me. I'd much rather be in the village, shoe talking with these Thai farmers and going to a dance, and, doing whatever it was. Just to me, it sucked me in.
And how'd that FM2 end up in your hands?
I had always had a bunch of Nikons, and I think I just at some point.
God, and you still use Nikon?
I still use Nikons. Yeah, don't tell
Don't tell Amy.
Don't tell Amy.
But that's incredible, actually, and it seems trivial, but you've used Nikon since the day I met you, and you're still using Nikon.
It's just you know where the buttons are.
Yeah, in this industry and markets today, that's kind of rare, but I actually really like that. And of course, most of us started with Nikons in general. I had an FM2, FE2, FM, F3, all those things. So you're riding around helmetless in Thailand with your camera.
Taking bad pictures.
Taking bad pics, but you said to yourself, okay, I know at least I don't want to be an academic. When was that transition of maybe this camera is the part that's going to take over?
So I came back to the U.S., and I have two brothers. The other brother was in Chicago. He let me sleep in his house for 6 months until his wife kicked me out. And I was working in a coffee shop in Northside Chicago. I hung up my bad pictures on the wall. I still remember this exhibit. I was like, can I hang my pictures of Thailand? People are like, oh, wow, Thailand. I look at these pictures now. I'm like, oh, God, this is embarrassing. And I think I maybe met some photographers, people studying. And they said, oh, there's this school here in town, Columbia College. You can take a photo class. And, I hate saying in the old days, this stuff was cheap.
Yeah.
Not hugely, but it was like cheap. So I think I'd already taken some undergraduate photo classes at Michigan. And then, so I think I was able to jump into Photo 2.
Wow!
And I took a Photo 2 class or something like that, and I was like, oh yeah, I want to do this.
This is it.
This is it. And I said, oh, I've already got an undergraduate degree, and they said, well, if you take these, I had to take that, and I think 2 other classes, then you can enter the grad program.
Okay.
So I did that, and then I signed up for the graduate program at Columbia College in Chicago, and that it wound up taking I think 3 years because I went back to Thailand at one point. So yeah, and that's where that was the transition, and actually the specific moment where I said I can't be an academic was watching Spalding Gray swimming to Cambodia.
Oh yeah, I went to that. I went to the play.
Oh, you went to the play?
Yeah.
Someone had a video that I had been back in the States for about 2 or 3 months, and I was just kind of depressed because I just come off this incredible experience.
Yeah.
And someone said, hey, you should watch this Spalding Gray thing, and I watched that. I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. I can't do this as in live a straight life.
Yeah.
I need to be out there. I need to be, just sucking it all in. So that movie was kind of, you can blame it all on Spalding Gray.
Spalding, I think, yeah, he seems guilty anyway. So that's interesting. Now you also started, there's a project in particular that we're going to talk about later in this interview, which is one of the defining projects of your career.
Still is.
And that was a project that you completed, at least in part, during graduate school, right?
It was actually my graduate thesis.
Okay, so we're going to get to that a little bit later in this interview, but this project. But you said something yesterday, which is what I want to transfer to now. So you're at Columbia College. You eventually get your master's.
Yep.
And you said that you had a very interesting interview with someone from a newspaper in the United States, someone who will remain nameless, who looked at the project that you had completed for your master's thesis. Again, we're going to talk about this at the end of the interview because it's important and there's a new book involved. But this person gave you an analysis of your work that was a take from what we can call the classic American journalism education, where he looked at this body of work that you'd poured your heart and soul into and said, he had a very American sort of classic journalism take on it, and you said, I'm at a crossroads here. I have a choice. I can go down that American classic journalism road, or I can go back to Bangkok. How you like me now? Just kidding. I think you'll agree that was a poignant take on modern photography, education, lineage, and the understanding of what it takes to get out there and actually do this as a career. So if you enjoyed that, well, I'm glad you did. I'm not going to ask you to do anything. I'm just going to ask you to think about what he said, and if this is a career path that you're on, that you think you want to be involved in, these are the kind of people that you need to at least know are out there and understand the dynamic of how the system works. So I will be back with more.